it can be difficult sometimes to just turn on the camera and just start talking. I don't know if it's because of this need I have to look at myself. I don't know what it is, but even now I feel the need to sit up because I have better light. Or I like the way that I look better from this angle. But I had started a video. I got probably 5 or 10 minutes in talking about going through the gender exploration while in a leadership position. But after a while, I kind of felt like, mm, I don't know. It felt too contrived. I think I felt like I wasn't really expressing a whole lot. It was more just kind of, I don't know. The basic idea that I was trying to get across was that being in a leadership position where I work, as I explore my gender, and which basically entails getting in touch with my feminine side, playing with toys like this. This is my new favorite toy, right? So when I'm at work, especially when I'm in charge of men, when I'm in charge of women, it doesn't seem to be as big of a problem. But when I'm in charge of men, there's this kind of doubt and this feeling of uh, maybe it's a feeling of inferiority, maybe a feeling of I'm not going to be respected. Maybe I don't respect myself. Uh, I don't know if women go through this. I don't know when women get put in leadership positions, especially if they are also, over men. If they have these doubts and this kind of like nobody's going to respect me, and can I even can I even kind of command other people? So there was one part of that is for me just how to be a leader. Period. I mean, I think one of the things that caused me to question my gender in the first place was I'm trying to think of a word, being kind of rubbed the wrong way by other men, right? In the sense of I'm looking for kind of like the ideal leader, right? Uh, I've known quite a few leaders who I hate to, sometimes I don't even like to call them leaders. They were in positions of authority or positions of uh, leadership positions, right? I don't know if they were necessarily leaders, but a lot of times what I ran into were men who felt like the only way to lead people was to be condescending, to talk down to people, and to try to be, in some cases, intimidating. Uh, and I think that there might be a time and a place for that. Like right when I was in the army, I started off as an E1, which is if you're not an officer or you're not a college graduate, E1 is where you start. If you're a college graduate and you're enlisted, you start off as E4. But so I started off as an E1, like I would say the average person who enlists. And I got promoted faster than the people in my unit, or I should say in my platoon. I don't know about the rest of the company. The unit, when people say my unit, there's varying levels of the unit, right? because typically you have a platoon that you're in, and the platoon is within a company, and the company is within a battalion, and the battalion might be within a brigade, so forth and so on. I can't believe I remember that, but but at least in my platoon, I got promoted faster than anybody else. I shouldn't say anybody else. I got promoted faster than anybody that was there at the same time as me. Started at the same time as me. So when I got there as an E1, I got to E4 faster than the other guys who were E1 when I was at E1. So hopefully I got that across. But then I stalled at E4 because E4 is a specialist, and just above E4 is E5, which is a sergeant. And when you become a sergeant, that's when they put you in charge of people, right? Typically, I mean, you can be an E4 and be in charge of people, but if you're going to be an E5, then it's kind of expected that you have to. I think for the school, I forget. I believe it's called NCO school. I'm not sure about that, but I believe the purpose of that school is to prepare you for being in leadership positions. But I stalled at E4 because I was too nice. So they said, they said we would make you an E5. You know, they had told me that I was one of the most squared away soldiers that they had, but they said I was just too nice. They said if you're going to be a leader in the army, you have to be willing to be a dickhead. Or no, I don't think they even said you have to be willing to be a dickhead. I think they said you have to be a dickhead. And I don't know if that's where it came from. I don't know if it was just that environment all by itself where I became convinced that I would never be a good leader. Before that I joined the army, I was in a leadership position at a restaurant, and I didn't feel like I was a good leader then. I felt like I did have a hard time asserting myself. But it was a similar situation even back then, because already back then I was questioning my gender, questioning my sexuality. Mostly it was my sexuality at that time that I was questioning. Uh, it also didn't help that I was using drugs on a constant basis. Uh, I think the questioning the gender, questioning the sexuality, even back then, really kind of got me in this kind of shameful feelings of inferiority kind of thing, right? Like, I don't know if that was my own ideas about gay people or trans. I wasn't really thinking about trans. I didn't really know any trans back then. I knew of trans. I think back then the word that we used was transsexual. So I knew what a transsexual was. Um, and that was already even, this was back in early 2000s, late 1900s, early 2000s, right? This was right at the turn of the millennium. And this was before I joined the army. I mean, when I was a manager at a restaurant. Uh, but I didn't feel like I did a very good job. Uh, and I don't mean that I didn't work hard. I just mean that I felt like I didn't make a good manager. Uh, and that was largely I would call it kind of the social anxiety aspect of it. Just in a way, not even wanting to deal with people at all. And I went through a similar thing recently when I got the job that I have now. I'm now in a leadership position as an assistant manager at a discount retail store, and I had this similar feeling when I first got the job, even before I got the job, and I was told that I was going to be moving into this position. Uh, they didn't even ask me if I wanted it. I don't think. I don't remember. Uh, but before I even got it, I remember going through that similar kind of like I don't know if anybody will respect me at all. You know. But this now the idea of like being trans is even more like I go to work with this idea that I'm going to work as a trans person. I do have boobs. Can you see them? Uh, so those are noticeable. So I don't know what people think when they see those. When I look at myself, I think I look like a man with a somewhat feminine appearance. If I wear a wig, I look like a woman. Maybe not passing, but enough like a woman that people would call me ma'am, probably. I don't wear wigs to work though, but I do wear women's tops. Uh, I do sometimes wear makeup. Sometimes I wear a woman's bracelet around my wrist. And but so it was very, very much like it was back, almost over 20 years ago at the restaurant, where I have this. In a way, it does remind me of like being on top of a woman and being in this kind of like, you know, I do feel almost like being a boss is like, in a way, like being a man, right? On top of a woman, penetrating her, right? I don't know if that has anything to do with why women are not often in leadership positions. I think a lot of women don't really make great leaders. A lot of the women that have met don't make great leaders, and it is because of this being too passive. Uh, this is one of the things that I'm looking at in the current presidential election. It is 2024. It's President Trump, former President Trump, however you want to put it, versus Vice President Kamala Harris. Uh, and when I look at Harris, I see someone who reminds me of me. That I think when I look at her, this is what I don't want to be at work. Uh, because she comes across as the kind of person you don't want her negotiating with Vladimir Putin or what's the guy's name from China? Xi. I don't know his first name. President Xi, I think is how you say it. But she just, I mean, even in her campaign speeches, right? She's talking about things like uh, when I was a prosecutor, I didn't ask people whether they were Republican or Democrat. I just asked them, "Are you okay?" I mean, that's very sweet. It's very thoughtful, but it sounds like you're running to be the head nurse in a hospital. It doesn't sound like you're running to be president of the United States, right? I think that this is how, like when Joe Biden got elected, right? Joe Biden is currently the president. That he got elected essentially by people who don't want someone who is willing to be a dickhead in charge. That he got elected because he is essentially a piece of Play-Doh. That he will mold himself to whatever you want him to be, right? If you told him to be a dickhead, he would be a dickhead. But if you told him to stand there and say, "Yeah, I like ice cream," then he'll stand there and say, "Yeah, I like ice cream." Uh, so that's why he got elected. And then people didn't want Trump in office because he is that guy who is willing to say things that are inappropriate, right? He is the guy who's willing to say things that might hurt somebody's feelings. To like, if you watch Trump when he shakes hands with other men, he does this thing where he like jerks their arm, almost like he's trying to jerk it out of their socket. But that is a way. It is a kind of physical way of saying, "I got you," right? You're my bitch, right? You know, and in the army, that's how they like it. Maybe it's not the "you're my bitch" sort of thing, but it is in a way, right? It is in a way that kind of I'm the one in charge, right? I want you to be okay, but if I have to step all over your feelings to get us where we need to go, then that's what I'm going to do. And I'm sure it's possible for a woman to do that. I'm sure it's possible for a trans woman to do that, but it doesn't always feel that way. There is a part of me that just does not want to hurt people's feelings. Uh, uh, I think I need a masseuse. I really have a hard time with hurting people's feelings, or even you might even say just displeasing people. I have had this talk at work with people. I've had this talk with people at work. Does those mean the same thing, right? Uh, there because I do have a another assistant manager there who tells me that if you have to be nice to people because you want them to like you. If they don't like you, they don't want to work for you. She's like, we had a manager who nobody liked, and nobody wanted to work with her. And the store manager apparently was talking about the same person, saying that he had an assistant manager who he had to basically, there was only one employee that he could schedule this manager with because nobody wanted to work with that manager, assistant manager. Uh, but I think that with a lot of jobs, it's not necessary to be a dickhead, right? Uh, at a place where I work, the way I see it is, there's really no reason to be a dickhead at all, right? It's not. I think the only time you might have to be a dickhead is if you have a dickhead working for you, right? So if you get somebody working for you who just refuses to do their job or wants to be a smartass back to you and talk shit to you at work or whatever, then maybe you have to pull that out and give it back to them. Maybe not. Maybe you can deal with that sort of thing without being a dickhead. Uh, at my father's company, the place where I worked before I worked where I do now, uh, there were a lot of dickheads there. There were that was kind of the work culture. The work environment was this kind of like, because it was all men. It was very similar to the army. There was this kind of like constant ball busting, right? That uh, it was the kind of you need to come to work with your sword and your shield kind of thing. I guess that's a good way to put it. I'm not sure. Uh, and so to work at a place like that, I would say that you have to have some kind of dickheadedness. Uh, that if you go there and your leadership philosophy is to say, well, I'm not going to ask you if you're a Republican or a Democrat. I'm just going to ask you if you're okay. If you worked at a place like, if you were a leader of a place like that with that kind of philosophy, they wouldn't pay any attention to you whatsoever. They would tell you to go home. They'd say, we don't need you as a boss. Get the fuck out of here. Uh, but you know, I'm not saying that as a trans person I have to take Kamala Harris's philosophy. Uh, but I do wonder how much of that is just a kind of inherent, like genuine expression of her personality. Maybe she's just not a dickhead. You know, maybe she just doesn't have a dickhead bone in her body. Uh, this is more what I'm getting at with myself, is this idea of like, maybe some people were meant to be in charge. Maybe not everybody's meant to be in charge. You know, maybe this whole thing of, it's in a way, if it is like sexuality, if because of some people are not meant to be tops, some people are meant to be bottoms, right? And if a bottom tries to be a top, it's, it can be an unpleasant experience for everyone involved. Uh, and I do wonder if being a leader is not also kind of a similar thing, where if you have a leader who just can't be a top, they just don't have it in them. Uh, Maybe that's not the best thing. Before I got this current job, there were times when I thought, yeah, I don't want it. And it was more that I just don't know if I have it in me. I don't. Being a leader isn't necessarily something that I fantasize about. Uh, I don't like. I don't. I take that back. Uh, I do fantasize about it if I fantasize about owning my own company, right? But even then, I don't fantasize about having people under me, right? It's more just the idea of being in charge of what I'm doing, right? Of my own work. I can see this image because one of the ideas for my own company that I had was to start a landscape design company that would morph into a kind of construction company. I say kind of. I don't know what kind of construction company it would be, but I wouldn't do the construction. I would just basically be the designer, the one who gets the permits, the one who deals with the customers, who manages the project, and that sort of thing. Kind of like an architect, in a way. People typically think of an architect as the person who does the drawing, they do the design, but the word architect comes from Greek, and it comes from two words, arche and tect. I think tect was tecton was the full word, but arche means first, chief, head. Now, arche is related to the Latin word rex for king, right? And tect is a builder. So an architect means the chief builder, the builder who is in charge, right? And that's kind of how I see this when I think about this company. It's when I think of like that kind of architect where it's like I do the drawing. I am the architect in that sense, the person who actually has the vision, but I'm also the architect in the sense of the builder who is in charge. Or I should say is in charge of the builders, right? Because I don't want to actually build what I design necessarily. It does depend on it. It does depend on what the design is, I think, but this is a fantasy that I have. I can see myself doing this. In that case, it does seem a little bit easier because it is my company. There does seem to be a little bit of a hang up when it is someone else's company. And I feel like I constantly have to defer to some other power, right? Uh, like it's not. I might make decisions, but to some degree, my decisions aren't really mine. That I'm just going by the company policy, or I'm going by what the store manager told me, and that sort of thing. So in those situations, this is where I do feel a little bit handicapped by that. I do feel like because I'm not the authority, uh, I'm just kind of the messenger. So like, you know, when I tell a worker where I work to go on break, it's not really my decision. I'm just telling them because I've been told for, employees to take their break in the middle of their shift. So if their shift starts at 2 and ends at 4, they take their break at 3, right? They don't really need me for that. Uh, I'm just the one there to, I guess you might say, to remind them or just to make it known, right? It's the middle of your shift. It's time for break. Nobody has a 2-hour shift there, by the way. Uh, uh, I was thinking about this today also in the context of my own family because I am the oldest of 4 boys in my family. Uh, the oldest of 4 boys, I'm referring to my father's sons from 2 different mothers. He had 2 sons from his first wife and 2 sons from his second wife. So I am the first of all four of them. And being the oldest, I felt like I had some responsibility as a leader. Like it's my responsibility to show these little ones the way to go, right, through life. In some way, that is the parents' responsibility, but even as just the brother, I felt like I had a responsibility that perhaps the parents couldn't take, if that makes sense, because it is, in a way, kind of like being in the army, where, like when I was in E1, I was there with other people, and we all were going through it together, right? But in this case with my brothers, I had a little bit of a head start, right? So we're all four of us are kind of going through this experience in this family with these two same parents. At that, at that point, that time it was with the second wife, right? And kind of going through this situation where I'm the one who's been there the longest, so I feel like I have this kind of responsibility to say this is how this is the follow me. Uh, I'll lead you through this. Uh, I don't know that I ever really took charge like that. So when I say that I felt like I had a responsibility, I don't remember actually thinking that so much like when I was a kid, like say like 10 years old. I don't remember ever thinking it then. It was more once I got to be like 18. uh, especially once I got to the age where I really started to question things, started to question my own identity, started to question what the hell I'm going to do with my life. Uh, that I can't be a kid anymore. The days of being a kid and waking up at Saturday mornings and watching cartoons and playing video games all day long, that's over. Uh, Once I got to that point, that's when I really started to feel like I need a guide, right? So I'm sure my brothers do too. Uh, but there was one issue where I felt like I am not going to ask them to follow me. I don't know if they would follow me. And that was on the issue of the sexuality, the sexual orientation. At 18, 19, I was already questioning my sexual orientation. Not so much my gender, but just the sexual orientation, and I kind of withdrew myself from that whole family thing, largely because of that. I, and I don't, looking back, I don't know if that was a mistake or not. Uh, I'm inclined to say it was a mistake, but I'm also inclined to say, yeah, no, that might have been for the better because, like I said, I don't know if they would have been willing to follow me. Now they don't necessarily need to follow me, but if they aren't inclined in the same way that I am, then it's not really a matter of following or leading, uh, because there is a kind of, I feel like a disconnect in a way. It would be almost like a sister trying to lead her brother, or a brother trying to lead a sister, where they're having two different experiences and they can't really help each other to get through those things. Like a brother can't really help a sister uh, get through the experience of she gets dumped by her boyfriend, right? The brother might be able to help. Maybe he can buy her a coffee at Starbucks, and say, "Here you go, feel better, cheer up." But it's not quite the same as, say, another girl who's gone through that, who can sympathize and these sorts of things. I feel like, but am I getting off the topic? What is the topic? What even is the topic? Leadership. Leadership is a big question on my mind at the moment because of my job and because of the election. 2024 election, Trump versus Harris. I'm watching this and I'm thinking, what is a good leader? What is a good leader? Of course, I am still coming off the Game of Thrones sort of thing. I've been lately watching people react to Game of Thrones, people who've not seen it before. Kind of following them through their journey of Game of Thrones. Because I was such a big fan of the show. And one of the reasons why I was a fan of the show was because the whole question of what is a good leader is one of the main themes of the show. I mean, you could almost argue that that is the whole point of Game of Thrones, is what does it mean to be a good leader? Even just today, I was thinking about that show while I was at work, because on the same subject of me being a leader, I remembered the whole thing of Theon Greyjoy in that show when he's just gone to visit his father to kind of implore his father to make an alliance with Robb Stark. And he's not received well at all. He's ridiculed, belittled. His father basically like, I sent you away as a boy. Did you come back as a man? No. That's not how he puts it. He does ask. He does asks it as a question. He's like, I sent you away as a boy. Did you come back to me as a man? Something like that. But then he accuses him of being dressed as a woman. Basically of being a pansy because he's wearing like a bauble. That's what he calls it. That he paid gold for, and so his father was giving him shit for this. And so this isn't what I was thinking about at work. What I was thinking about is how Theon responds to this by taking over Winterfell, right, as a way to please his father, a way to kind of get out of that being treated like a ridiculous human being. And I thought about where I'm at work, and I do feel this kind of desire to be in a leadership position. And I was thinking about it though. I was like, is that am I Theon? Am I attempting to take over Winterfell just because I've been treated disrespectfully, or I just don't respect myself? Am I trying to take up something that doesn't belong to me? I did think that was interesting that they had Theon take over the place where he grew up. He grew up at Winterfell, and because if you think about it, they could have had him take over some random keep, stronghold, castle, but they had him take over the very place where he grew up. Uh, which I thought was an interesting choice. But that's another reason why I like the show. If you've seen Game of Thrones, I'm trying to think who in the show I would be as a leader. I like to think that I would be Jon Snow, even though I don't. I believe that Bran Stark, as the ultimate king, or the king at the conclusion of the story, was the right choice. I think in my current situation, I don't think Bran would be the right assistant manager. I think the kind of place where I work, I think Jon Snow would be the more appropriate leader. For one, Jon Snow was popular, right? Because he didn't just assume leadership the way that Bran did. Bran just kind of went off on his own little journey and then came back and just went straight to the throne, basically. No fight. I mean, he didn't fight, right? He hardly did anything at all. He just kind of strolled in this little wheelchair. Da, 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 da. Nobody mind me. And then everybody's like, Bran should be king. Oh, me. But that was the right choice because Bran is Jesus, right? That's what the whole point of Game of Thrones is, to accept Jesus as your king. Uh, so yeah, but I don't know that Bran would make a good assistant manager where I work. But is that because what I want is to be the one who people cheer for, saying, the King of the North! The King of the North! I want to be the one that people vote into the position, right? So we love you. We want you to lead us because we love you. There's a verse in the Tao Te Ching where it says that the worst kind of leader is one who is feared. Better than that is one who is loved. But the best leader is one whose people don't even know that he exists. So this was the sort of thing that, when I was watching Game of Thrones, allowed me to predict that Bran would be the one who became king. My prediction from around season 6 or around season 7 was that Bran would be king, but no one would even know that he was king. I didn't know how they would get that across, so maybe it ended with people knowing that he was the king, just because how do you establish that he's the king if nobody knows it? I mean, say for example, I don't want to get off on tangents if you have not watched the show, but when Daenerys attacks King's Landing, if you think about it, Bran wanted her to do that, but he never told her to do it. So it's not appropriate to say that Bran wanted her to do it. It would be more appropriate to say that Bran knew she would do it and just let her do it anyways. Knowing that he would become king as a result. Uh, so this is in the Tao Te Ching. The kind of leader that it talks about is the kind of leader who gets things accomplished without actually doing anything. He's able to accomplish these things because he sees the will of heaven in all things, right? He sees the hand of fate, you might say. Uh, uh, Maybe that's a good kind of leader at a discount dollar store. I don't know. Uh, I'm getting tired. I'm getting tired. I feel the need to snack on something. 45 minutes. Uh, uh,